I just want to come back to the Parliament's position, which spoke out with a very clear voice on this. We said that it was extremely important that the current legislation is well implemented and monitored. We're sure that if you break up the current legislation, open it up all again, then it's going to be counteractive. And we're actually going to lose more biodiversity.
This is the position of the Commission too, but we need to expect the conclusion of the outcome of this process and share it with you. And we hope that this will happen in the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we can go to the next item in our agenda. We can have a joint debate on the item 5 and 6 in our agenda. That are the objection pursuant to Rule 106, renewing the approval of the active substances glyphosate. And as you know, I have only to remember that at the beginning this objection was subscribed by 30 members, also from members not of the ENVI committee. And now we have one co-sponsor for each political group. And I start immediately giving the floor to Pavel Poc on behalf of the Socialist and Democratic groups. Please, Pavel.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'd like to start by thanking all the colleagues who were co-involved in the drafting of the motion of the resolution. A lot of the text is based on my proposal, so if I may, I'll speak slightly longer than the others. I'm very sorry that this is happening at all. A parliamentary objection is a last-ditch effort that we have to resort to. And in fact, we should not be forced to resorting to it at all, because when we do, it means that something has gone wrong. Or that the entire comitology procedure used for the approval and reapproval of some active substances is simply flawed. The original authorization ran out in 2012. There was a lot of time to discuss this. And I have a feeling that the discussion picked up pace only about a month ago. In March, I had an international scientific conference attended by IARC, EFSA, and the Commission, and only a few colleagues that are taking the floor today attended. Those that are against were not present. I guess they're not interested in independent science. And then we sent a letter to Commissioner Andriukaitis asking him that the planned voting in the permanent committee be postponed, which is what happened, because when they were probing the positions of the member states, the Commission realized that they would not achieve qualified majority and in fact did not move for a vote. The approval of glyphosate runs out in June, and member states will have another opportunity to vote at the next meeting of the Permanent Committee in May 2016. So although this objection is only formal and Parliament has limited powers, I hope that the Commission will take our proposals fully into account as they are creating a new proposal. As a physiologist and a member of this committee, I cannot accept an approval of an active substance where the impacts were not fully studied, particularly when it comes to its effect on a good functioning of the hormonal system. Glyphosate is one of the many active substances that we are exposed to as part of a cocktail. It is at the same time the most widely used active substance that a highly renowned scientific agency of the WHO called to be a likely carcinogen. It is everywhere. It is in the environment, in our body, in our urine, everywhere. So simply it should not be easily reapproved without any conditions. And if it is to be authorized, if it has to be authorized, it should be for as short as possible. All the studies should be immediately published and new review needs to commence. And I have a few questions for the European Commission. How does the Commission plan to respond to the objections of the EP and Member States? Secondly, how you, Commission, and EFSA are going to deal with publishing studies that are currently not available for review. Thirdly, based on which has the Commission decided to extend and move for the extension of the reapproval of glyphosate for 15 years, which is the maximum period allowed for in EC 2009/1107. How have you taken into account precautionary principles, if at all? Based on what data has the European Commission determined that the impact on population is minimal, while in the US we have seen studies pointing to the contrary? Are you going to initiate the monitoring of residuals of glyphosate in foodstuffs, which, based on pressure from GAO, the FDA has already commenced? EFSA says that one of their priorities is antimicrobial resistance. So why is it that they did not take into account at all that glyphosate is an antibiotic, was in fact devised as an antibiotic, has a patent as an antibiotic, and acts quickly in creating resistance in pathogens while it decimates good intestinal microflora? And in fact, there is enough peer-reviewed studies to show that. I was quite surprised by the discussion that ensued at the Agri Committee this month. Many things were mentioned, and I'll give you 4 last points, if I may, Chair, to obviate some comments reoccurring from Agri. Independent laboratories usually say that there is a problem with glyphosate, while labs that are linked financially to the industry show that glyphosate is okay. And the information is mainly from the tweets with the debate with the Commissioner. In fact, glyphosate is everywhere. It is in the soil, it is in foodstuffs, in German beer that I love and have enjoyed drinking so far, which in fact contrasts with the previous statements of the industry that glyphosate is completely metabolized without leaving any residuals. One of the people said, decisions must not be based on emotions. We need proper and serious scientific studies. Well, of course, I completely agree. We do need those studies. I agree with Mr. Paulo de Castro that we don't have those studies. He mentions ENSA mentions 3 types of key studies, but those were funded by the industry. So if we don't have those studies, then perhaps we should wait with the authorization until we have them. Not only for glyphosate, but for any active substance of this sort. Mr. Des said, EU decisions need to be based on proper scientific expertise, not ideology. Well, obviously, that's exactly what we want. There was a scientific conference that I organized. Mr. Des did not attend, and if he did, he would have found out a lot more. If we're calling for scientific knowledge, then we have to be open to receiving it. And at that conference here in the European Parliament, we published Professor Mesnich of UK King's College of London, Professor Kruger from Leipzig, from the United States, and so forth. There's a lot of scientific knowledge that was shared, both about the mechanism of action at molecular and biological level, but also in terms of its effect on lab animals. And simply there, the image wasn't very good. And also about the long-term effects of low doses, which, by the way, EFSA is not testing. And in fact, there is a very sad correlation study on a very large cohort in the US that shows a link between glyphosate and a number of diseases. The last comment and the last tweet Glyphosate is vital for agriculture. Available science says even alcohol and caffeine are more toxic. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is exactly the kind of ideology that they were criticizing. I don't really know what kind of science he was referring to, but direct toxicity of alcohol can certainly be higher than glyphosate. And the same applies to salt, but that parallel cannot be extended to substances that interfere with cellular metabolism, which are clearly endocrine disruptors, and glyphosate simply is, because it is inhibiting CYP450. And since we're talking about agriculture, I wouldn't use the word vital. For instance, when the parallel with caffeine and alcohol is very good. It is very addictive. There is going to be withdrawal if it's going to be withdrawn. But once they go through the withdrawal, our farmers are going to be much healthier, and so will our agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, Ms. Konečná for the GUE.
Děkuji, pane předsedo.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Kotz is the person who is reopening the subject, and he has already mentioned quite a lot. But let me give you a brief summary. About 9 months ago, we met to discuss our objection against the reapproval of glyphosate as an active substance. You turned it down conditionally, saying that it was moved too early and that we need to wait for the EFSA opinion. Well, you all have that opinion, but there doesn't seem to be an overall level of happiness here. EFSA evaluation of glyphosate, in fact, raised more questions than provided answers. It's quite non-transparent. The process is very strange, and obviously so. So not only those of us who have been studying this topic for a long time, but also public at large, and in fact, the European Ombudsman have been quite shocked how the Commission and the agencies are dealing with the approval of pesticides. Rather than denying our comments from last year, they just added to more and more. More and more studies are coming out showing that this is very dangerous for our health, that it has found its way to groundwater, to beer. Pesticide Action Network Europe, Slow Food, Greenpeace, and other non-for-profit organizations are coming out every day showing that glyphosate is dangerous to human health. Unfortunately, the Commission has turned a blind eye both to the objections of ourselves and of many other people. I remember that this group had in February a meeting in Strasbourg with the representatives of the Commission, and I'm still freaked out when I'm thinking about that meeting. The Commission was saying that there's nothing to be afraid of because the sun is carcinogen at all. Well, that sort of really makes my blood curdle. Our last objection from last year was turned out by many of you only conditionally, and the authorization of glyphosate was renewed for 6 months. Colleagues from ALDE were taking the floor saying that that is the longest reapproval that they would permit unless their objections be dissipated. And it doesn't seem to me that the Commission, EFSA, and others were able to dispel some of our concerns. On the other hand, it seems to me that we are all in a situation where we've seen this before. Those who object to our position are covering under many, many data from EFSA, but the point is that EFSA has lost its credibility long before this particular affair, and not only in connection with the latest Ombudsman report. EFSA approved saccharin, which is banned in the US and Canada for being carcinogenic. Cyclamate, same thing. It is banned in the US as well. Yes, the US, which comes up every month because we're discussing them here with regard to TTIP. So we were talking about 6 months of reapproval before. Now we're talking about 15 years, and the EU is planning to be hazardous with the health of its citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, I simply don't think that this committee should be involved in this. It's a Russian roulette. This committee needs to seize responsibility for the public health of EU citizens, EU citizens, in fact, have given us their trust and their mandate to do this. We need to fight this impossible way of the Commission. It's a charade of the Commission and the EFSA. We don't need glyphosates in the EU. There are many, many more mild pesticides. Let us not give preference to big business over our citizens. Reauthorization before achieving data is a practice that could be used only when there is absolutely no danger that the conclusion about the safety of the active substance is wrong, says the Ombudsman. If we don't know who to trust, let us trust those that we elected. Let us trust those that are to be trusted, the European Ombudsman. And let us be responsible and accountable to the EU citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have to explain to the colleagues that the order of speaking, it is before the members of a political group who have signed the objection. Later, the other members who have signed the objection, and later the other political group who have not signed it, only to explain why we have a different order. And now, on behalf of the Greens, Mr. Staes.
Dank u, voorzitter.
Thank you, Chairman. Colleagues, we all know there's been a huge increase in the use of glyphosate since 1974, 260 times more today than in 74. We know that glyphosate is a non-selective herbicide in the world. Glyphosate is used essentially in agriculture, 3/4 of uses. It's also used in gardening and so on. Pavel Poch said that there is more and more glyphosate in the water, in the soil, in foodstuffs, and the famous German beer that he enjoys drinking, but also in human urine and in breast milk. There can be no doubt that human beings are being exposed more and more to glyphosate today than in the past. Now, it's the pesticides regulation of 2009 that deals with all of this, and it sets out in great detail as to how to deal with these active substances. In the law of 2009, it says that an active substance can only be authorized if human exposure is negligible, first of all, or secondly, if it's necessary for plant health, and there is no other way to achieve that. We also know that in the 2009 law, it says there has to be an EFSA opinion. There is one now. Many of us have objections to it or questions about it, but it also says that we can apply the precautionary principle, that the Commission can apply the precautionary principle and not to extend the authorization of these active substances. A few months ago, we had a debate on the matter between representatives of the IARC and EFSA. EFSA claimed that they relied on a large number of scientific studies as references, but there isn't a great deal of public information available, and the relevant information isn't available to them, which is not the case for IARC. Well, that's quite a point. Now, the Commission is proposing extending the authorization of glyphosate for 15 years. Why? It's the maximum period. Couldn't something else have been proposed? Most members of the Parliament aren't in favor of extending the authorization. Why so long? In any case, we also know that the Commission's proposal isn't connected with any binding protection, although we know that it's a danger to mammals, humans. We know that it kills not only weeds, but also algae, bacteria, fungi, and that it has a doubtless adverse effect on biodiversity. Now, despite the conflict between IARC and EFSA, there's one thing they agree on. They want to know what the Commission is going to do about making EFSA's scientific data available. We know in the EFSA opinion it does say that it isn't, that glyphosate is not carcinogenic, but at the same time, in the broader study, there are a number of arguments set out indicating the harmful effects on larger mammals such as humans. And then, talking about carcinogenicity is one thing, but there's also the question of it being an endocrine disruptor in humans. The Commission extension is not likely to protect human health, animal health, or the environment. The Commission is not using what it has available to it. That is the precautionary principle, and our group thinks that is not compatible with the measures in 11/7/2009. So our question is, we would like you to withdraw your proposal for an extension, ensure that an independent study is done on a classification of glyphosate, and ask EFSA to render public all its scientific information. DG Sante is there to protect human health, and I want you to ensure that that is done. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, we have more than 20 speakers, and then if everyone is going to speak for 5 minutes, okay. Now we have Mr. Pedicini on behalf of EFDD.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'll try and be a little bit more brief than that. Now, once again, it's incredible, but again, the Commission is invoking, we are trying to invoke the precautionary principle. Once again, glyphosate is something that we know a lot about, actually. It damages biodiversity, it damages health, it comes directly into our food chain. And Germany has done a study on that. So there is a problem for humans, but also there are studies that have been funded actually by multinationals producing glyphosate in the first place. There has been 17 experts in 11 countries that have studied this and have seen that there is a strong link between health problems and including cancer and glyphosate. And it seems to be that it will probably be carcinogenic. That's what the IARC study says. EFSA disagrees, as we've heard. But as you know, these pesticides are sprayed on crops that are eaten by humans. And that is also the case when it comes to children eating these before they are harvested. So it's important to take this into account. How can you renew this authorization? We still need to see more criteria, more things studied with regard to endocrine disruptors. We want more certainty on this. What about the European Chemicals Agency? That could come into play as well. To the Commission, what do you think, what conditions do we need to actually apply this precautionary principle? If not now, when?
On behalf of ENF.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mes chers collègues.
Thank you, Chairman. Colleagues, I'd first like to raise a point of form and procedure. All the groups are making the same objections, whereas ours stands alone with the same objective. I'd like to recall that Our group is here only to serve the interests of citizens, their health and the environment. I thought that would have helped us to rise above party politics. Allow me to get to the substance now. All of us are aware of the risks of glyphosate, particularly when its commercial formula is used together with toxic co-formulants, other ingredients. The Commission really needs to distance itself from its own regulation and the positions being taken in the institutions. We are fighting against antibiotic resistance. It's been a leitmotif for years. Glyphosate is considered to be an antibiotic, and patent applications have even been lodged for its use as such. The fight against antimicrobial resistance really goes via fighting against the excessive use of antibiotics. Why has the Commission gone as far as it has? We know that the scientific context is a special one. IARC has a separate stance from EFSA, so there are serious doubts, and doubt means risk. The study of the German foundation, Heinrich Böll, established a high exposure of particularly vulnerable groups to glyphosate. So all the more reason to be cautious. The European Ombudsman reminded the Commission how important it is to follow the precautionary principle, particularly when it comes to placing pesticides on the market. In other words, one would expect the Commission to be cautious and to carry out a new risk assessment, perhaps with new criteria and approaches. Moreover, it was promised that the co-formulants list would be published, but really that's turning things around. It's contrary to risk assessment and the precautionary approach. The Commission really wishes to press forward with its legislation on pesticides, particularly glyphosate. Then the funding of research and proposing other solutions and alternatives is vital. The member states are very divided on the matter, and therefore the Commission should have taken time to confer and ensure that positions come closer together.
Thank you very much. And now Mr. Demesmaeker.
Dank u wel, collega's.
Thank you, colleagues. I had decided to support the objection on my own behalf against the Commission's proposal to extend the authorization of glyphosate for another 15 years. My point is this. There's the whole question about whether glyphosate is carcinogenic or not. But apart from that, there is no scientific consensus on the matter. According to EFSA, glyphosate is not carcinogenic. The World Health Organization's IARC has concluded that glyphosate probably is carcinogenic. It's clear to me that the so-called co-formulants is a very important matter, determining factor in the IARC and EFSA arising its conclusions. IARC analyzed the co-formulants, but its starting point was quite different. You can't compare apples and oranges. The Commission seems to have realized that as well. So why should the talamanina as a co-formulant be attached to the decision to extend the authorization? That's part of a solution, but not the whole solution. It's hard for me to understand why the Commission has immediately opted for the maximum period of 15 years. And so that echoes the questions of my colleagues. The most important thing to me is public health, and the precautionary principle should be applied. So the whole discussion, and also, so further studies need to be done on glyphosate and all the co-formulants. So I'm not I'm not disputing or casting aspersions on EFSA. I think it's very important to assess risks. EFSA has been very objective, but once again, I don't think it's enough to only assess the active substances. The co-formulants also have to be analyzed. And finally, I also support those who are calling for more clarity about the possible endocrine disruptive effects. What I conclude is that there are too many causes for concern to support the Commission's position, and therefore I support the objection.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. I agree with Pavel Poc, what he said in the beginning. All our committee can really do is raise the matter, but all the more reason for us to express our position. Nor is this the first time that we've raised the matter in the Environment Committee. I, too, am co-rapporteur on the matter, but not on behalf of my group. It's on my own behalf, because my group's position is divided, and I'll explain why, as I've explained before. The European Commission is doing precisely what it should not do when it comes to extending the authorization. It really took as a starting point a position on which it should have been unbiased. There is a political controversy and also a media controversy because the public is also very concerned. IARC said glyphosate may well be carcinogenic, whereas EFSA's experts are saying it's doubtlessly not. In other words, the scientific findings are inconclusive. The experts don't agree, but the Commission is happy to draw conclusions in a categoric fashion, and that's why we've jumped in here. And we also know, as has been said, that it's not just glyphosate that's in question. It's also the co-formulants. It's the whole cocktail that makes Roundup so dangerous. There are 500 co-formulants. The Commission is proposing only banning phthalalamine in the name of the precautionary principle. You must be joking. Precautionary principle for 1 out of 500 co-formulants? Well, there certainly must be another reason. I won't repeat what's already been said. We have to be brief. It's not every day that we see the presidency locking horns with the Commission, and publicly at that. And they're not alone in this. The presidency is concerned. Many members are, many others are concerned. 243 million European citizens have raised concerns, and that's why the experts committee in March said that we probably won't achieve the necessary qualified majority, and that's why things were postponed until May. Well, that's the way I see it. This proposal, I don't know if we can say that it's stalled, but it has to be reviewed. I won't say that those who've signed the 2 resolutions before us are naively expecting glyphosate to be banned overnight. Well, that's not what we're calling for. You have to read it very carefully. We're calling for a new text. We're calling for the Commission to redo its homework. Well, we're not going to do the drafting for it, but why not a new timetable phasing out? We want a list of the problematic co-formulants, not a single. We want to know that the Commission is listening to us, that they're relying on experts in Germany, France, and elsewhere, and to listen to public opinion. Well, I'll stop there. I have other things to say, but I can see the President getting a bit impatient. I do think it is still possible to bring the Commission around? The Commission, which has taken a radical stance.
Yar for the EPP.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender. Ich soll auch
Thank you, Chairman. I apologize to my colleague, on behalf of my colleague Delina, who couldn't be here for health reasons. I've got the main points that I'm to raise. We can't always raise ideological concerns. It's truth that is the main thing. We've heard a call for independent scientific studies. Well, that sounds good. But for every study, you can find a study claiming the opposite. We've got a procedure. I'm not just upset with the Commission, but also with the Council. They're holding things up with abstentions. It's already been said that EFSA has passed on the risk assessment to the German Foundation, and it's quite odd that Germany is now abstaining. Germany, as a member state, is not believing in the results of its own institute, and that really gives me pause for thought. Let me just explain why I'm so worried. When you find residue of glyphosate in urine, levels that are higher than the levels in drinking water, that doesn't really help me along here. I mean, it's a little odd to compare urine with drinking water. I mean, anybody who does that probably isn't really searching for the truth. So once again, could we take a very objective approach and think about the effects in practice? We need to come up with a solution that can actually be applied in practice. It's already been said, well, it doesn't really matter if you ban one substance, another one will come along. But it's been our experience, whenever an active substance is banned, then active substances, well, the farmer has to use a more expensive one. So on behalf of my colleague, I'd like to see a more objective approach taken, a sober approach, and in the whole decision-making process taking place between the Commission and the Member States. Well, I think that process needs to be completed. We need a result. Well, if I had my way, I would ban abstentions in council voting. That's my stance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now Ms. Gerling for the ECR.
Thank you, Chairman. First, I'd like to say that it's clear that there is a huge amount of concern about glyphosate. Some of it I understand, some of it I simply don't understand. But one thing I do want to say is that I recognise the real concern that Mr. Potts has. I think he puts his points very well. I think some of his supporters vastly overstate their case, which is to the detriment of the case, but there you are. Let's keep this thing in proportion. I'm very concerned about the resolution. I can't support it because I think it's inaccurate in many ways. That's not to say that I don't think that, and my group don't think that some of these issues should be looked at. But I do get a little bit fed up being told that EFSA has lost its credibility and we can't take any notice of EFSA. I don't remember anyone saying that to me in this room when we were talking about neonicotinoids, where EFSA made a statement which seemed to chime with the mood of the room, but was against the rest of the scientific advice. But that was okay. But now that people don't actually agree with EFSA, then we've blown their credibility. This is simply not the case. EFSA have a job to do for us. They looked at the active substance and they came up with their conclusions. We are comparing apples and pears when we look at EFSA and IARC, because IARC is primarily about the co-formulants. That's the issue that we have, and I don't understand why the resolution couldn't have concentrated on that issue and therefore have been available to all of us to support. It goes much further than that, which is why I find myself unable to support it. Point 1 considers that the draft Commission implementing regulation fails to ensure a high level of protection of both human and animal health. That is simply not the case. Simply not the case. Neither is it the case that it fails to apply the precautionary principle. The precautionary principle is not a simplistic, if there is any chance at all that something might happen, you ban it. No, it's a balanced consideration. It does apply the precautionary principle. Neither do I think that we should be saying that it exceeds the implementing powers of the regulation. No, what the people who are supporting the resolution are trying to do and seeking to do is to go round the agreed procedure, which effectively says that it is an implementing act and it will be agreed on by experts. Those experts have not yet spoken publicly. They've had a discussion, we know that, but they haven't yet given us their conclusion. So calling on the Commission to withdraw the implementing regulation and submit a new draft to the committee, I think, is preemptive and unreasonable. It calls on the Commission not to renew the approval of glyphosate and set up a clear time frame. There is one. They have said that they will bring forward by July a time frame on co-formulants. That already exists. That's a superfluous point. Point 4 calls on the Commission to rapidly ensure Sorry?
Someone is objecting about the time, but
Well,
we have
sorry,
not stopped at the time for the previous, after the previous, sorry.
Well, thanks. Calls on the Commission to rapidly ensure an independent review of the classification of glyphosate. That is being done. I don't think the people who've signed this resolution have actually read it. Number 5 calls on the Commission and on EFSA to immediately disclose all the scientific evidence. Hooray, I can agree with that one. They should. Unfortunately, it's surrounded by all these other ones. 6 calls on the Commission to mandate the FVO. Against what standard level would they be testing? Ridiculous to do that without setting out the MRLs. And is of the opinion that an appropriate follow-up of this resolution again, I just simply don't agree with that. I wish we could get these things into sensible words that we could all agree with. I think there is some bones here for questioning glyphosate, but this just goes much too far. It's hysterical and should be resisted.
Thank you very much. Mr. Huitema for the ALDE Group.
Ja, dank u wel, voorzitter.
Thank you. I'd first like to say that in the ALDE group we had a discussion this afternoon. We don't have a clear-cut position for or against the extension, but the decision has to be based on scientific analysis without it becoming a political discussion with cherry-picking. The ALDE group is calling on the Commission to carefully carry out the scientific assessments and also answer the questions raised by this committee. Nonetheless, I would like to make a personal remark, and that is that the ban on glyphosate can have an adverse effect. As has been said, the agricultural sector is the largest user of glyphosate, and they are aware of that fact, and that there is a concern on the part of citizens. More and more farmers and gardeners are applying the principle of integrated pest management, which I wholeheartedly support, and that is supported by a task force created by the European Commission. Now, what is integrated pest management all about? It means using herbicides in a responsible way, and only when no better possibilities are available. And there are ways to significantly reduce the use of herbicides, and so I think that is what needs to be looked into, more than simply banning certain pesticides or herbicides, because farmers and gardeners need to be able to have a safety net, which is now under pressure. So what are you saying? Gardeners and farmers are being forced to use alternative methods that are and products that are often worse for public health and the environment. What comes to mind, for instance, is burning weeds, which is harmful to the environment, or the use of natural toxins, which often are less effective and more harmful to the ecosystem. We also need to take account of the socio-economic effect of a ban in the EU of glyphosate, whereas third countries will continue to use it. That distorts competition, which is bad for the farmer, and also for the agri-food industry. Thank you.
Mr. Liese.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a difficult discussion. It's controversial. There's one point that I would like to raise that I think all of us agree about. On the positive side, the Commission has proposed that thalidomide should immediately be banned and to investigate the byproducts. And I think there should be an immediate ban. In 2012, I wrote to Commissioners Dalli and Potočnik about this. The Commission wasn't terribly convinced that anything needed to be done, but I think progress has been made in the meantime. Otherwise, well, it is tricky. Some in the Commission have given the wrong impression that glyphosate is innocuous. Some people have said you can drink it like water. As a doctor, I would recommend that not be done. It is a problematic substance, and therefore we need to think very carefully what to do about it. But we also need to consider a ban, even after a phasing out period, is not going to mean that EU agriculture is going to automatically be organic. There are alternatives. Are they less questionable? We don't know. We need more information. And the point raised about imports is important. Well, that through imports, things wouldn't improve. We would be subject to restrictions that our competitors are not. Well, we will have a vote tomorrow, and I hope that we can think more in terms of a compromise, looking forward to the plenary. It's high time. Well, and the question of the 15-year period, well, is that appropriate or should it be a shorter period? We need to work that out. We need to think about the co-formulants, and also should the scope be reduced Europe-wide, or is it is the Commission right in having the extension for 15 years for all substances? I think it's going to be rather difficult to simply say yes or no. This is a very complex matter.
Ja, vielen Dank. Ich meine, das ist immer so.
Thank you. Well, that's always the way with objections. I mean, it's a yes, no, or abstention. I mean, the member states, when they hide behind an abstention, then well, there are different mentalities when it comes to that. We've got two ministries locking horns, and so they're abstaining. I mean, that would really be a no, I think. I have to say that the Commission and EFSA. Well, I think in the European Union, this is a very difficult time, and their hands are being forced. I don't think it's sensible. Well, we've heard the arguments here. We've seen the studies of EFSA. They've stuck to a particular plan. I think the end product should have been considered, and that wasn't done. The Commission seems to think, well, it's all going to simply go through Parliament rather easily, but our job as the Parliament is to scrutinize, and when we have these weighty arguments presented by the WHO, not even to mention beer drinking, well, of course you can find traces of all kinds of things in anything. I think this whole procedure, I think the Commission and EFSA have to change the procedure, otherwise the institutions are shooting themselves in the foot. The Commission is, and also EFSA, and that's why I think we need to change thinking about this. Tomorrow it'll be possible to vote yes or no, and also to send a political signal. I think we need to uphold the objection and vote yes.
Mr. Faria.
Obrigado, Sr. Presidente.
Thank you, Chair. As my EPP colleague said, we need a serious debate to take an objective decision, and that's what's lacking. It's a very complex and controversial subject. Firstly, what we have here is a clear division amongst scientists and amongst member states, in fact. EFSA says the active substance is not analysed it without the co-formulants, and the IARC analysed it with co-formulants. EFSA presents its results as this substance not being carcinogenic, and IARC presents it as being carcinogenic. So different results. And the broader analysis carried out by the WHO comes to the conclusion that it's carcinogenic, and we need to know which to go for. We're not scientists. We're here to defend public health, and we need a basis for that. And I think what's on the table at the moment is, well, we have to apply the precautionary principle and take a decision on whether this substance is going to continue to be used based on more scientific, more conclusive, more specific data. We're more confused now than we were a few months ago, and this has actually been the contribution of what's happened as a result of the various clashes in the scientific community. We are actually more confused now than we were a few months ago. It was said at the beginning that we need a broad impact study before we can take a decision. I fully agree with that. We're talking about extending use for 15 years, and it has serious implications for public health, this decision. So I think it's our obligation to take a decision which best protects public health, based on decisive advice from the scientific community. And we don't actually have the elements we need at the moment to take a decision with a clear conscience. I'm not in a position, Chair, at the moment to approve extension of use of these products for the next 15 years. I wouldn't have a clear conscience if I made that decision.
Ja, ich darf mich erstmal bei den Mitgliedstaaten bedanken.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank the member states because of their critical stance. They've put a stop to this procedure for the meantime, so I'd like to thank them for that. Now, this question of not having a limitation to the authorization over 15 years, well, the fact that we've been very critical about this for the last 2 years is something that is very telling. These things need to be taken seriously. It's a scandal, actually, that the Commission is even coming up with this kind of proposal. There are no limitations in use. No limitations in use. What does that mean? Does that mean that every farmer can drive through his cereals and kill off all the weeds, but he'll be killing the straw as well? What happens to that? And then he'll be able to sell his cereals to the local baker. I mean, nobody can understand that. It's not feasible. We can't understand that. You can't understand somebody going to a do-it-yourself shop and can buy this and just simply use it in their garden. They don't have any practical knowledge of this substance. I mean, just think about the implications of all of this. And also having 15 years. This is a question that really needs to be tackled in great detail. So, first of all, I just wanted to thank people that have stalled this process. And then I have to say that we get so much feedback from citizens, concerned citizens. So we do need to discuss this in Parliament. We're entitled to do that as parliamentarians. But there are other reasons that I'd like to bring into the discussion. A number of studies on biodiversity show that 40% of the area that is covered by glyphosate, that there's a loss of biodiversity. So bear in mind our biodiversity strategy. We've got to be consistent. We're not being consistent with our aims. And this is nothing to do with what the EFSA studies are saying. And it's not that we don't have an alternative. Hundreds and thousands of biofarmers use glyphosate and still come up with decent products. But the increase in the last few years of 70% shows that it's only used, actually, because it makes farming cheaper. It's an economic motivation rather than anything else that you might want to mention. You might protect the climate because of this or whatever. All of those reasons are spurious. It simply makes farming cheaper for farmers. You use chemical means instead of anything else. It's not a fact. It's not that it's necessary. It's a purely economic motivation behind this. And if you, as a farmer, can only farm if you use glyphosate, then you should shut up shop anyway. There are mechanical methods. There is anything else that you can use. There are alternative methods, alternative means rather than glyphosate. So if we can't prevent authorization, and that would be what I would aim for, but if we can't do that, then we need rigorous limitations on use. And there's no discussion about this at the moment. And then on the procedure as a whole and authorization, this opaque process should be a thing of the past. The IARC studies are public, EFSA studies are not, and this is something that we can't allow to continue. Thank you.
Mr. Pargnon.
Oui, Monsieur le Président, chers collègues, quelques mots pour...
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, colleagues. Just a few words. I think it's important to recall here in the Environment Committee that we got a first victory against Monsanto, which has been poisoning us for 30 years with its glyphosate, which is better known as Roundup. It was important to recall that and to name the company Monsanto, because it's a company which for years has been, both here and around the world, carrying out very heavy-duty lobbying with one sole aim, which is to make more money. We shouldn't forget that when Roundup is attacked, when glyphosate is attacked, when you're attacking it, you're attacking the root of Monsanto's existence because, as you know, Roundup represents 40% of its annual turnover. It's true that when we're dealing with a file like this, it can give rise to attitudes which are no longer in line with the ethics we should have as parliamentarians, but which might respond to certain interests, economic and financial interests, because that company is behind them, behind us. And that's why, beyond everything that has been said by a number of our colleagues about risks that we're running, without wishing to, because of the presence of that pesticide. And let's remember there are 150,000 tons of this sprayed around the world. And the reference was made to Dr. Peter Liese. The WHO actually is telling us this is a carcinogen, but nevertheless we have the European Commission through EFSA, which is telling us, no such thing. We've had a study, an opinion based on studies which were financed by the agricultural industry. Otherwise, how can you explain that 73% of the experts taking part in these studies are unknown? So we shouldn't set aside the possibility that there has been an influence here on the findings. And I think the political work we have to do is to denounce such things. We know that there may be serious effects on Europeans' health, and we shouldn't expose ourselves to future shame for not having exposed such interests.
Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I was very interested in following this discussion. I'm a farmer myself since I was 14. And the last 20 years, I have not used glyphosate one single time, and I won't be doing so in the next 20 years either. Still, I can't really understand the way these discussions are going. By the way, I don't have any contacts with Monsanto either. For 40 years, there was no discussion at all about the toxicity of glyphosate. Why has it suddenly cropped up now? In the past, I've experienced quite a lot. Anthracene was used for 30 years. There was no discussion. And all of a sudden, there was a discussion on anthracene. And the same thing now. The discussion started because the patent expired. It cost 83 marks, but the price went down considerably. So I wonder whether the same applies to Monsanto. Will the patent expire soon? Is that the reason why, perhaps? I don't know, but everything has been confused here. In Germany, there is a risk assessment institute, and the president last week, in a weekly, which is not exactly friendly towards farming, said that glyphosate has the same dose as cooking salt, as salt, the same dangers as salt. Well, if we're going to ban glyphosate, we should be banning salt as well, shouldn't we then? And then in Germany, around 1900, the life expectancy was 38. There were no herbicides at all. And then last year, the pension reserves had to be increased because we've extended the life expectancy, and we keep doing so. So I mean, glyphosate must be extremely hazardous if it's managing to promote life expectancy so well. Now, you might hear that I'm from Bavaria, but there was a vote in the German parliament, but there was no samples for residues. If you're going to study something properly, you need to look at residues. And the German Institute for Risk Assessment said that the dangerous doses will be reached if you drink 1,000 litres of beer every single day. Well, I mean, I think the beer will be more risky than the trace elements that you've got in that beer. So you've got to keep a sense of proportion here. And then urine, glyphosate in urine. Well, if you were to find glyphosate in urine, then that would be very dangerous indeed, because that would mean it would be absorbed by the body and it wouldn't be excreted from the body. So, you know, I'm really a bit of a loss with this discussion. Okay, it doesn't need to be extended perhaps by 15 years, maybe 10 years, but this whole discussion about it being a lethal hazard, well, I would like to dispute that. What about things used in biofarming? I wonder whether there are results as to whether glyphosate or sulfate, copper sulfate, is actually dangerous. Have there been any studies on that? I mean, I'm a little bit at a loss, and I will be voting against this motion because it's been launched by NGOs, and we as parliamentarians shouldn't be representing their opinions. We should be representing our own.
Danke, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you very much. A lot of things have already been said. I'll say very clearly that I'll be voting in favour of the resolution because I think we are obliged by the precautionary principle in Europe. When there are reservations, when there are doubts, and there are doubts, we know that. So we've got to ensure that we take these doubts seriously. On Monsanto, all I can say is it doesn't just supply glyphosate, but it's also is resistance in crops. If you supply resistant corn and glyphosate as well, that is really a great danger for our ecological diversity, to say the least. And then it was mentioned indirectly the fact that in Europe, with our animal production, we are accepting more or less, because we're importing feedstuffs from third countries, we're accepting that a lot of glyphosate that is used or produced in Europe is used in third countries. So we're accepting a hazard for people in third countries, and you've got to include that in an assessment, any assessment that you do. So we've got to think about the time frame, certainly, and to see what steps should be inherent in the procedure, because we can't accept a situation whereby Argentina, for example, would be doing something that we would ban here in Europe.
Thank you very much. And now Ms. Scherer-Pierik.
Voorzitter, dank u wel.
Thank you, Chairman. There is a discussion on this as well in the Netherlands on scientific facts. There's a lot of discussions. Minister Van Dam, on behalf of the Socialists in the Parliament, said there was too much discussion. It's very important in horticulture and farming, and colleagues have been using this glyphosate for many years, and it is shown to be safe in normal use. That's what he said. Now, I was concerned about this because we need food, but we also need welfare and health. And we need to look towards our commissioner as well. I think our commissioner, well, last week we talked about this in the Agricultural Committee as well, and he said at that point to us, he said he's weighed everything up, and we have to be able to trust EFSA. He also said that. We should be able to trust EFSA. We've set it up to support us, to advise us, and we should take action based on what EFSA says. He said that very, very clearly. So I would say to that, we've got to be looking at food production, safety, and science. So who am I supposed to follow here? I myself was concerned, but our commissioner managed to persuade me last week. There are 2 points, though. 15 years, that's too long. Others have already said this. We can't see what's going to happen in that time frame of 15 years. It's too much. And also the facts need to be made public. That's another thing that I would like to take to task.
Tak for det her, formand. Tak til kollegaerne, som har foreslået, at vi skal have den her ind.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank colleagues for coming up with this proposal. I would be against an extension to this authorization. This active ingredient is assessed in very different ways. That alone is a signal that we need more time for our discussions as to whether the authorization should be extended or not. The WHO and EFSA have come up with different results. And this is something that we need to take seriously. Not even the experts can agree. So that means that we simply need more time to get to the bottom of this. We need to look at the active ingredient in much more detail, much more thoroughly. So I think I am in favour of this objection, this resolution, because we shouldn't be extending the authorization of a substance that is subject to so many doubts.
Thank you very much. I'm also concerned, like so many other colleagues who have taken the floor here today, bearing in mind that the analysis of epidemiological studies of the workers who use herbicides, which was carried out in 2014, showed an increased risk of B-cell lymphoma, which is a form of non-Hodgkin lymphoma. Workers exposed to glyphosate had an increased chance of developing the disease. There was a detailed study of 2,300 cases, of whom only 17 were elaborated in detail. The International Agency for Research of Cancer has categorized glyphosate as cancerogenous in 2013, and the Californian Agency for Health also issued a notification that they intended to add glyphosate to the list of chemicals which are considered to be cancerogenous. It seems that this topic needs to be tackled with a lot of concern. There is a scientific proof that everything has to be done with a measure of precaution. I am very surprised with the proposal of the Commission to extend the approval for the glyphosate for 15 years. It seems that they have not taken into account all the arguments that my colleagues have tabled and that I'm tabling now. In terms of the knowledge of toxicity, it seems that glyphosate has not been researched well. The damage that it may cause can be studied only in a long run, so every indication that something is amiss has to be taken with a lot of precaution. The question of glyphosate is important because it is linked with genetically modified organisms which have expressed proteins which cause the tolerance of sorts to glyphosate. This is the main reason why, in my opinion, there is a tendency to reduce the harmful effects of glyphosate on health. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now Mr. Brannan.
Thank you, Chair. I've made a note here, actually. 16:45 p.m. on the 21st of March 2016, when I heard the daftest argument ever put forward at a committee meeting by Herr Dess. We're living longer, so therefore glyphosate is not a problem. So presumably obesity is not a problem because we're all living longer. Cancer's not a problem because we're all living longer. In fact, no diseases can be a problem because we're all living longer. I think we should instigate an immediate health investigation of what is in the water in Bavaria, because clearly something very dangerous has appeared in that part of Germany. I'd just like to go on record. I'd just like to go on record to say I'm in support of this motion. I'm particularly concerned about information about residues. I think residues in water, soil, food, drinks, and in the human body in urine and breast milk are particularly worrying if this is true. I therefore think, given there are question marks, that this is a time for the precautionary principle to be invoked. As many people have said, I think the availability of the scientific evidence is incredibly important. If we've got evidence that isn't on the table, that's just most unhelpful. And I'm also concerned that we're getting an increasing resistance to glyphosate amongst weeds, which in many ways does suggest that maybe time is up for glyphosate. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And now we have the Commission. Ms. Julika is here, and I think that you have a lot of questions to answer.
Indeed, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you actually for the opportunity to answer the questions ComEnvy has put forward and provide also clarification on many of the points that were raised, because the Commission also acknowledges that glyphosate is a concern. We see that ourselves from the public debate, and it warrants that we explain as best as we can the processes. I would like to start recalling that we as Commission and in general, we are here in the context of a legislative framework, the Regulation 1107 of 2009 of the European Parliament and the Council, which the Commission is committed to respect. I think this is very clearly giving us the frame of how we act and how we go forward in this particular renewal, and how we go forward in all sorts of renewal processes of such substances. So based on the provisions of that legislation, we consider the EU regulatory framework and the EU regulatory process as robust, as thorough, as transparent, and it clearly also outlines and indicates the players that are relevant in that process. At this stage, I would like to recall the regulatory process and 4 basic steps that are taken in such a process. And at the same time, this will also outline who are the relevant players at each of these stages. So firstly, we have the assessment of the active substance by the rapporteur member state. It was referred to today already. That was, in this case, Germany, the BFR. Following that stage, we have a peer review by the European Food Safety Authority and all member states, which in the end leads and led to an opinion adopted by the authority. And it's worthwhile mentioning that this peer-reviewed process led to an agreement of 27 of the 28 member states, so a broad agreement of member states' authorities. Such a peer-reviewed process is based on regulatory guideline studies, but also open literature, and takes into account comments from experts of all member states, the European Food Safety Authority, and a public consultation on the assessment of the rapporteur member state. So it is quite a broad and comprehensive process. Following this stage, it comes to the Commission. The EFSA opinion comes to the Commission, and the Commission analyzes the European Food Safety Authority's risk assessment and prepares a draft decision for refusing or the approval. In this case, the Commission has brought forward a proposal to renew the substance. The Commission draft decision is discussed with Member States experts who can vote on it. Just to clarify, there has been no vote taken. We are in the decision-making process. The proposal has been discussed with Member States. And an approval decision may contain restrictions of the use or recommendation to members. And then follows the fourth step, where Member States also have a further role to play, as they have to reassess the formulation of the product sold in their territory. In their authorization decision, Member States may define the conditions for the use of the product. So some of the uses that have been discussed here today could be restricted by the Member States. They can also make decisions on the co-formulants and the use and combination of the co-formulants. So also here is a step and a responsibility of Member States concerning the actual products that then have to be authorized. So, as I mentioned before, the main players, as outlined in legislation, are Member States experts, the EFSA and the Commission in the process as laid down in legislation. Now, for the renewal of glyphosate, this entire process started in 2012. And in November 2015, the EFSA conclusions were published, which, in my opinion, indicates that this was a thorough process. And in this context, I would like to address the points that were made, or most of the points that were made in the discussion, starting with the controversial evaluation of IARC, which was published in March 2015. So I also understand that a discussion has taken place with IARC, EFSA, and its executive director here in this committee. So when that IARC evaluation was made public, the Commission immediately expanded the mandate of EFSA in March 2015 to ensure that the review, that EFSA also reviews the underlying information of the IARC classification and to include this assessment into the EFSA conclusion. And in doing so, EFSA, as you know, has not come to the same conclusion than IARC. And I think at this moment in time and at this stage, it's also important that the Commission does have full confidence in the process, in EFSA, in their scientific work, but also the process at large with a broad involvement of Member States and the concept of an open peer review. I would like to inform the committee that excuse me, also following another European laid-down process, last week a dossier on the classification of glyphosate was submitted to ECHA, so the European Chemicals Agency, for a review of the classification in broader terms of glyphosate. That review will also include whether a second review, whether glyphosate is to be considered carcinogenic. This ECHA process is also expected to be thorough. However, it will be taking time, and we can expect the results and the outcome at some stage in probably late 2017 or early 2018. Now, in anticipation of this process, which is underway, the Commission made a clear commitment to review approval and plant protection products if ECHA process leads to a change in a classification relevant for the approval. But I would like to be very clear that also at this stage and based on the dossier submitted to ECHA, there is no indication of carcinogenicity of glyphosate at this moment in time. Regarding the much discussed co-formulants, I would like to recall that there is a certain member state competence to also and already act on unacceptable co-formulants. So, for example, some member states have established lists of unacceptable co-formulants already. What the Commission has done in light of the concerns voiced by EFSA regarding this one co-formulant, taloamine, that the Commission proposes in its draft implementing regulation to ban this co-formulant. More broadly, the Commission is working in a group with Member States experts and EFSA to develop criteria to identify more broadly unacceptable co-formulants. So this work is ongoing, and we expect to have a proposal for the Standing Committee on these criteria in the third quarter of 2016. So also specifically on co-formulants, very specifically for glyphosate, the Commission's proposal is taking up the issue of taloamine, and more broadly, we are working on the topic already. Regarding transparency, a point that has been made also frequently in this committee here, the process, in particular the peer-reviewed process, is considered already transparent, quite transparent, and also the legislation clearly lays out, what aspects and what parts of the scientific studies have to be disclosed. One has to recall that both EFSA and also the Commission are bound by legislation, which struck at the time a balance by the co-legislators. I recall it was 2009 that this legislation was or entered into or was agreed on. So in this context, some information is to be published and has been published. Others is considered confidential. The published summary, in our opinion, provides sufficient detail for an independent review, as demonstrated by EFSA during a recent event organized by MEP Mr. Poch. We are, as you, aware of the requests to also access and assess raw data, and Commissioner Andriukaitis has committed himself to write to industry in this particular case, calling on industry to publish studies proactively, in particular in light of the public interest in this particular case and with this particular substance. Some MEPs have questioned us and raised the issue of glyphosate residues. Just to clarify, residue controls is not the remit of the Food and Veterinary Office, but it's the responsibility of member states, and results of quite comprehensive residue monitoring programs are compiled across the EU by EFSA and are also made public. Now, specifically for glyphosate, the comprehensive program is in place, and the analysis of more than 10,000 samples of food and food commodity for glyphosate have shown quite reassuring results. So of these 10,000 samples, more than 93% have been without detectable residues. Only 6.3% of these samples have shown detectable residues, but still within the legal limits set up with the instrument of MRLs. And only 0.17% of these samples were exceeding legal limits. And even there, one has to be precise that exceedance of legal limits does not necessarily mean a health risk, because legal limits are much stricter and lower than strictly necessary to protect consumers. Nevertheless, this amount or this percentage of samples was not within the legal limits. There have also been questions on integrated pest management and non-chemical alternatives. It is an area where the Commission is paying high attention, and it is also investing time, resources, and actually money via the framework programs into research. So just to summarize, the investment in research and innovation in the area of plant protection, plant health, and integrated pest management has been more than 100 million under the framework program 7 in research, and continues to be supported under Horizon 2020. So considerable work is going on in this respect, and considerable resources are invested into research. Now, speaking more generally about the request to submit a new draft decision, as I said before, the decision-making process is ongoing. The Commission has submitted a draft to the Standing Committee. It was indeed discussed. There was no vote. But the discussion will, for the time being, continue on the basis of the current proposal. Nevertheless, the Commission has asked Member States to clarify their position and also forward to us any changes they would consider necessary for them to support the continued authorization or renewal of authorization of glyphosate. The Commission has also made it very clear that we are looking for broad support of Member States in this question, and indeed the draft regulation will be discussed at one of the next and forthcoming Standing Committee meetings. There was a lot of reference today on the precautionary principle. As I said before, and as I've outlined, there has been a very thorough process, and the Commission, as I said, has full confidence in the players in that process, so Member States, competent authorities and risk assessment bodies, but also we have confidence in EFSA and, as I say, the process at large. So we consider that the risk assessment process for glyphosate and the potential renewal of glyphosate has been very comprehensive, and that further and provisional risk management measures are not warranted. Now, to be very clear, in the proposal, the Commission has already undertaken to review the decision should the process in ECHA, so the European Chemicals Agency that will inter alia look into carcinogenicity of glyphosate, should this bring any evidence that there is a risk or that there is carcinogenicity, the Commission made this clear commitment to review the approval of glyphosate. More broader than that, should there be any compelling evidence that would put the authorization or the renewed authorization in question, the Commission is at any time able to act and to trigger a review, no matter whether the period of renewal is 15 years or shorter than that. So with this, I think I have addressed, I hope, many of the questions. I think I would like to, in closing, refer to the issue of trust in the European institutions and also in the process. And the Commission could not agree more to the importance of trust in the European institutions. The Commission considers that by following the provision of the commonly agreed legislative framework, we make a big step in the right direction and in generating and maintaining trust. So in that we follow the procedure as foreseen, in that we foresee to the bodies and scientific agencies that are mandated by EU legislation, in maintaining the confidence in the independent scientific review of EFSA, but also in the capability of member states' authorities. We do consider that there is sufficient thorough substance to maintain the trust, and as I said before, trusting EFSA and not putting it into question is a cornerstone of the system. So with this, I would like to close and thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you as well. Yeah, because we are quite in time shortage, I will not react on everything what was said, just only think what Mr. Dess said, which is far from truth, too much not to react. This proposal of an objection did not come from any NGO or from outside the Parliament. It came from me and from 30 my honourable colleagues. I'm very sorry that Mr. Dess is not present. I hope that somebody from EPP will say it to him. And immediately we go to next item on the agenda, and it is consideration of draft opinion of the Committee of Environment on implementation of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of